All right, we're back this week. We're still talking concussion and how you as a parent or athlete can be best prepared to handle those things. Like we mentioned at the end of the video last time, the best concussion prevention program is being educated and being aware of what's going on. So today we're going to talk about kind of what classifies these sports-related concussions. The reality is we don't use traumatic brain injury because that just elicits a kind of a negative connotation of what happened. But the reality is that's what it is. It's a brain injury related to a force, a mechanical force. This particular injury is hands down one of the most complex that we see in sports medicine. It's difficult to diagnose, difficult to evaluate, and even harder to clinically manage. So concussion typically results as a direct blow to the head, face, or other part of the body. There's usually a rapid onset, short-lived change in neurological function. Sometimes there's some noticeable disturbance in these functional things, more so than like a cut or a structural abnormality that we could see on MRI or something like that, which again speaks to the difficulty in diagnosing these things. There's a wide range of clinical symptoms that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but the most important thing to understand is that this requires a sideline evaluation. It's an essential component of the injury, and one of the major issues that happens when you lose consciousness is that there may not be an appropriately trained medical professional there to help with that sideline evaluation. But here's the reality. A lot of these injuries happen without a loss of consciousness in the first place. So some of these other signs and symptoms you may notice, whether there's the loss of consciousness or not, are headache, brain fog, some of these emotional symptoms that you might notice. There's some physical signs, like we talked about the loss of consciousness. There could be some memory loss or some neurological issues that we notice. Balance impairment is a big one. We'll see people kind of having a difficult time standing, walking, kind of trying to get back to the bench in hockey or to the sideline in football or soccer and just having a difficult time walking. The cognitive or behavioral issues are something that typically parents will notice. Their son or daughter will get home from a sporting event and notice that things are a little foggy. Maybe they're a little slow to react to things. Could be even more where they seem angry for some reason, and that's a huge red flag. Last thing is this sleep wake cycle. Typically there's excessive grogginess, so on and so forth. So another thing to kind of pay attention to. Again, not to be redundant, but assessment should be performed on the sideline with an appropriately trained licensed physician. And right now they're using what's called a Sport Concussion Assessment Tool, or SCAT. I think we're on the 5th edition now, so SCAT 5 is what you should be holding your sideline assessment to. But the reality is we're going to keep talking about this stuff for another week. We're going to talk about return to play criteria next week, return to school criteria, but being attentive to some of these symptoms, signs and symptoms, if you will, especially if there's no loss of consciousness, is the concussion prevention program that we're trying to preach. So we'll see you guys next week. We'll talk a little bit about treatment and return to play.